Hello again. Here we are. Wow, we're in the fourth chapter. Getting near the end. That's kind of cool. I hope you've been enjoying it. I certainly have. And I really look forward to interacting more with you guys over time. So very cool. Alrighty. So what we're going to do now is not really take a left turn, but we've really been talking about everything in the context of something we call the classic approach or the classic module, if you will. And the classic module is, where an individual student submits as an individual. Everybody's working on the same basic activity. So when they assess each other, they're assessing individuals who really did the same task that they did. And again, that's probably the very common and most used module for peerScholar. But, well, we're trying to kind of walk a line that you always have to walk with educational technologies, where you want it to be very simple to use, very simple for people to set up, and yet you also want it to be very powerful so that people can use it in many different ways. So in trying to think of how to do that, we ended up coming up with the notion of creating separate pedagogical modules. That is, we started to interact with people who wanted to use peer assessment. They wanted to harness that power. They understood, what was there, but they wanted to use it in slightly different contexts than we originally imagined, and they wanted a little bit more control over some of the features and functionality. And so, what do you do then? Do you take that classic model and build in all this flexibility so that it can do all these different things? Well, we ended up deciding not to do that because we worried that would make the whole setup and everything much more complex. And for people who just wanted to, do a certain thing, we wanted to keep it as simple and focused on that thing as possible. And so rather than make that one setup more complex, we've actually, the first question people are asked when they're setting up an activity is, what sort of activity do you have in mind? What kind of pedagogical implementation are you thinking about? And so once they choose that, then the interface is tailored to that choice. And so it stays very simple. The setup stays very simple. We only show them things that make sense in the context of what they're doing. And, if we need to add things to the process, we do. But again, we only add it in the cases where it's needed. Okay, so that's what we're going to talk about today, is some of the other pedagogical modules. Now, one of the things I always want to give you today is a glimpse into the future as well. So, when it comes to pedagogical modules, in addition to the classic, we currently have two that are available, the case study module and the group work module. And they will be the focus. Case study will be the focus of this one, and group work will be the focus of the video that follows. But I want to let you know that these are really the first three in what we imagine to be a suite of different applications. So just to give you a sense of the things we have in mind and the things that are on our roadmap to be built out, we imagine a presenter module where, for example, a person may be presenting live in the front of a classroom, and the professor might want all of the students or some subset of the students to provide feedback sort of in real time or immediately after the presentation that person can get. So we're now combining sort of the live presentation with a digital form of feedback. The mentor model, for example, would have different people providing the feedback than receiving it. So you could have a more senior group of students being the ones that provide the assessments to a more junior group of students. The seminar module would be really tailored towards using peerScholar to prepare students for a seminar. You can do that now, but again, it requires you to make peerScholar dance in some odd ways. So we're going to customize that interface to make it very easy to use. And finally, we're thinking of a cascade model. And I don't want to say finally because we're constantly thinking of other ones. But the cascade model would simply allow the sort of end of the classic model to be the beginning of another step. So you could continue and have students building, for example, a paper by doing the intro first and going through peer assessment and then adding a method section, etc., etc. So to really scaffold the learning. So I mentioned these for two reasons. One, to give you a sense that these things are on our minds, and should any professors come to you and say, wow, I wish it could do X, well, here's some of the things that hopefully soon we will be rolling out. But also, when a faculty member says, I wish it could do X, maybe that X represents some other pedagogical approach that maybe other professors would also be interested in using. So again, we see you as our bridge to your faculty there. And so to the extent that other issues or possibilities come up, please communicate them to us. We appreciate kind of knowing what's on your faculty members' minds and how we can help them better. So cool. But today it's going to be about the case study module. So now let's shift to that. Now, the case study module was built, very much in the mold that I just told you about. Faculty members, in this case from business faculties mostly, having a very specific use case in mind. And so I'm going to tell you about that use case, but as we satisfied that use case, we also ended up creating a more general process, I guess, or a more general tool that can be used in other ways and is being used in other ways too. So let's begin with the specific use case. Here was the issue. They were worried that in the classic peerScholar process, if all students were asked to write about a given case, and then they're eventually going to be allowed to revise what they write after seeing their peers' work, they worried because they say, sometimes the trick of a case is coming up with a really good idea, something really smart that business should do. And if I'm exposed to the ideas of my peers, if I see what 5 or 6 of my peers wrote, and if 1 or 2 of them put a really good idea, well, my goodness, I'm in a tricky position now because I want to do well on the paper and I've been exposed to some great ideas and I'd kind of like to put those ideas in my work. So we're putting students in a very kind of strange position where they're being exposed to ideas that they, in that case, maybe shouldn't put into their revision. However, when we talked to them about it, we came up with a slight tweak. What if it worked as follows? The whole class is assigned 2 cases to learn. You must all read and think about case A and case B. Now, it could also be case C and case D. It needn't be just 2, by the way. It can be as many as you like, but I'll focus on the A and B. And then you tell students you're going to write about one of those cases, say case A, but when you assess students, you're only going to be assessing the students who wrote about the other case, case B. And then, of course, you're going to be allowed to revise your case A. So they're now seeing their peers' ideas, but the ideas are presented in the context of a completely different business situation. Might it still be the case that they get exposed to these great ideas in the context of case B, and they think, wow, I could transform that a little bit and put it into case A? Well, yes, that could still be the case, and professors loved that. In fact, they said that's really what we're trying to do with cases, is we're trying to teach students how to take clever ideas from other business contexts and bring them into their own context. That's kind of the skill we're working on. And so if we had it work this way, that would be fantastic. Okay, so we built it out, and I'm going to show it to you how that works. But just before I do, I'm also going to highlight as we go through that although we really built it out for this specific use case, and that's why we've called it the case study approach, in a more general sense, it does allow one to put students into groups. You can give each group a different task if you like, and you can control which groups assess which other groups. Whether, like for example, you can create groups where all the assessment is just internal to the group. Or more like the case study, you can create it so that they're only assessing other groups. Or you can mix those 2 things. Okay, so this has uses sometimes beyond the original case study. For example, if somebody wants to just take a class of, let's say, 50 students and kind of create 5 groups where those 10 groups, let's say, where the 5 individuals within each group are the same individuals interacting with one another. And so you literally want to create 5 subgroups where they are now a closed system that interacts with one another. Well, you can do that too. Okay, so let's just jump to it. Here's a peerScholar in the background here. Let's make it a little bit bigger. Okay. I'm going to log in as a faculty member now. And once again, the usual caveats. This is the standalone. It would be a little different if it was the integrated. If it was the integrated, you'd kind of end up right here right away without clicking in. Here are some of the activities we have, but we're not going to worry about those now because we're going to start from scratch. So we're going to go to this Add Activity button. And when we click on that, well, here are our pedagogical models. And you'll notice the group work is in beta. Again, we'll talk about that next video, but it's pretty much nailed down now. So we're coming sort of to the end of the beta for the group work, and then again, you will see other ones come and they will go through a beta phase and eventually become situated as well. So we're going to go into the case study approach this time. So I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to call this case demo. And we're going to create the activity. Now, one of the first things you'll notice, depending on how carefully you've been paying attention to this, is in the past when we did the classic activity, there were just these latter 3 steps. Now we have a 4th step at the very beginning, where we have to literally set up the cases. You know, this is an example, as I try to tell you, where the complexity of the process is trying to be controlled, and so we're trying to tailor it to what you actually have to do. Okay, so here's the beginning. And so we're assuming that kind of A-B model, and in fact that is how it's most often used. So usually you would have, you know, just 2 cases like this, but you can create as many cases as you want. You know, we can do a 4-case situation like this, etc., or 2-case. So I'm going to stick to the 2-case, but just, you know, be clear that the option is there to have as many groups or cases as you want. Now, what this has automatically done for me is take my student list, and I have 7 students in this class, and it's broken them up amongst these cases. So it's put 4 of them in one, 3 of them in the other. One of the things you can do is have some control over this. So for example, you can manually distribute. So if you say manually, okay, and now what I've got here is I've got these students that are here. I can drag some over here for now and get them out of this case and put them into this other case if I want. Maybe I'll take one of these guys and move them over here. Oh, I don't know. What am I doing now? I'll take Steve. That's me. That's being fussy with me. There we go. Moving them right on. So you get the sense. You can move these people around a little bit and do the drag and drop. You can also, by the way, allow the students to choose the case. When they come in, you can allow them the choice. Do you want to do case A? Do you want to do case B? And by the way, I'll show you we can make it a little sexier than case A and case B in a second here too. You can also set a maximum. So you can say, you know, I only want so many students doing each case, and once that case gets full, then they can't do it anymore. Okay, so I'm going to go back to random, done. And so it randomly puts people into cases. Now, rather than saying demo case 1, you know, I can actually make that sound nicer. Maybe this is the case of Beyond Beef, their business model. Oh, Beyond Beer. Sorry, Freudian slip there. Beyond Beef. And this might be some other, this might be, okay, sure, some light beer case. There we go. And so, you know, you get the idea. People can be assigned to one or the other. That's basically all there is to this step. To just title these cases, to say how many you want, and then assign students to the cases or allow them to choose as they go in. All right, cool. So off they go. Now this looks similar to what you've seen, but there is a difference, and I'll highlight the difference. And the difference is only with respect to the create phase. So for the assess, well, no, that's not true either. That's not true. Look at that. There's some things in the assess phase. I wasn't thinking about that too. So the reflect does not change, but the first 2 do. So remember, the create phase is where you give the instructions. And so here we would have the instructions for the Beyond Beef. Instructions for, and I'll just call it BB for Beyond Beef. And we can have attachments. So let's actually try that. Let's use some attachment I've used before. I'll use my oral rubric for whatever case. And so this is what we're giving to the Beyond Beef people. These are the instructions we give them. These are the attachments we do. Now for the light beer people, we can have completely different instructions, right? So this is, one example where, and we can have, by the way, completely different attachments. So let me attach this, whatever that is, ethics light bulb. And so now as we go back and forth, we see each has its own instructions, each has its own attachments. In most cases, for cases, you might attach the case. So you can see them having different attachments, but they may have the same instructions. It may be basically read this case and describe what you would do if you were asked to come up with a new marketing campaign or something like that. But the general idea here hopefully is clear. You can basically just separately instruct these different groups as you see fit. So you have that control there. The other difference, and really the other only relevant difference, is this little bit up here. How will cases assess each other? So in the typical case study approach, it would be between. All right, so that the Beyond Beef people are assessing the light beer people, and the light beer people are assessing the Beyond Beef people. And so that's one where you're going across the groups. The within is what you would use if you literally were setting up these groups as sort of separate ecosystems. You wanted to think of each group as a separate ecosystem, which you might want to do, for example, as a prelude to group work. Like maybe they all have to work on something and give each other comments before they physically get together and interact. And so you might want to really control who's in that group, and you might want to control the fact that they are giving comments to each other, not to other groups. Now the random is of course a mix of the two. So in a random, let's even imagine we had 4 groups, 4 cases. If that was the case, you might write about case A, but then when you're assessing your peers, you could get some from A, you could get some from B, you could get some from C, you could get some from D. Whereas, by the way, if it was between, you could still get some from B, C, and D, you just never get your own, okay? So just to be clear about that. Other than that, the setup is the same. You literally create this peer assessments. And so let me be clear about what we're not doing flexibility-wise here. We are not changing the way the assessment is done. So we may be affecting whose work you get to see when you assess, but when you actually assess, however the person builds this assessment, whatever questions they build in, those will be the same questions that every group answers of one another. Okay, so we're not having that layer of complexity in there. It's really just what we saw. What are the instructions for the different groups, and who do you want assessing who? Okay? That's kind of it. Everything else remains the same. So if we flip back to here, let's go back to that. That's our goal here, and it works really well. The way this sometimes comes up, there's 2 ways it comes up. I mean, if you're talking to a business prof, just tell them about this, because you'll see they'll go, wow, cool, that's what I need. Another way, though, it might be relevant is sometimes profs are really worried about plagiarism. And I should have almost had a whole separate video on this, I think. But so of course you can use Turnitin or something like that ahead of time, have students do that beforehand. But my answers to other ways of avoiding plagiarism. One is, first of all, give students kind of question that does not have an answer on the internet. Make sure they can't just search and find an answer and paste it in. Give them something that requires them to think in a creative, novel way and to represent their perspective on an issue. So that's one thing. Then you're not going to get a lot of plagiarism. But the second thing is this case study approach. So you can also, if you have a faculty member that's worried that somehow students will plagiarize the work of other students because they're seeing it when they assess, well, then they could use this sort of case study approach, and it need not be a case, right? It could be in the context of anything. So maybe it's a book report, but again, you ask your students to read 2 different books, and they write a book report on one, and they assess book reports on the other, etc. It really kind of gets rid of that chance. All right. So all sorts of flexibility of that sort. With the case study approach, it's a simple modification to the interface, but when you think it through, it can allow you to do a number of kind of interesting things with it. Alrighty, cool. So let's leave case studies there, and let's come back and do group work. Later, guys. Bye-bye.